Today we're going to talk about how to take a photo of your artwork that's not done digitally to begin with. We're just going to use a piece of paper, but this would apply for a painting or any sort of 2D material really that you're trying to document. All right, so right now I've just got this thing sitting on a tabletop here. And the first thing we want to do is notice that if I've got my camera on an angle, okay, we've got a larger space from the edge of our frame to our document here at the top than we do at the bottom. Okay, there's like a perspective effect that's happening. That's kind of exaggerated a lot here. Okay, so obviously this is not what the image is looking like. The things at the top are getting squashed and distorted compared to the things at the bottom are looking larger down here at the bottom, okay, because the bottom is wider than the top, okay? The paper, of course, is not like that. The sides are parallel to one another, and so it should look like this, okay? So we want to make sure that we're not tilting our camera one way or the other and distorting our image, first of all, okay? And we can tell that by looking around the edges, and we want to have the same amount of space between the paper at the top and the bottom and the left and the right, okay? Here and here, all around the image as best we can. And we want to get reasonably as close as we can without clipping off any of the image. We don't want to get too close and lose part of the image either, all right? So the next problem, as we look at this, we're going to see there's a shadow across the bottom of this. And that is most likely my phone/camera here, as this thing is flat on the desk and the lights are coming from overhead. And this is generally a bad way to do this unless you've got lights shining in on the side to properly light our document. So you can see here, this is the photo that I took exactly as I had it set up there in the video. And what you're going to be able to see here, I hope, is that that shadow across the bottom is very noticeable in a photograph, whereas in the video it was not as noticeable, and just to your eye looking at it, it was even less noticeable probably or possibly than the video unless you're looking for it, okay? And so the point here is any kind of tiny little shadow and imperfection in paper is going to get picked up unless the lighting is kind of just right. And even then you're going to still pick up little tiny bits that you maybe don't want to be there. So we want to get it as clean as we can before we take the picture, less work to do after if we're trying to get it perfect. So we're going to move this. Another option is to try to hold it onto an angle of some sort. You can see how that shadow is gone. That was here like that. But it can be a little tricky to hold it on an angle, and it might slip down or something. Or else you have to create something that's on a specific angle. But we're going to try and mount this on a flat surface because it's a piece of thin paper here. I'm just going to tape it, and let's cut to that here. All right, so we've got our image mounted vertically here, and you can see the lighting's more even, which is good. We've got just a lot of overhead lighting above me here. Of course, if you've got other lights that you're setting up, maybe, that's a little bit of a different circumstance, but let's assume we don't have any kind of lights specific to doing this right now. And later we'll talk about that if we do later. Okay, so we've got this thing mounted up here. The other thing is any kind of little shadow on the paper here was caused by this thing being folded out because of the tape right there. You can even see the tape mark. Okay, this is not ideal. If you're doing something, maybe someone's paying you to document like their artwork in a gallery or something. Maybe it's already on the wall, so it's less of a problem. But if you're documenting your own artwork for a website or something like that, maybe we want to try to make sure this is not like that. Partly the paper is wrinkled, that's causing a problem. The other problem is this, the bottom, we're getting this shadow here, and it's distorting the shape of the paper. Again, if I exaggerate it, okay, you can see how this is you're just not seeing the image properly, right? So we want this thing flattened down. And so we'll just pop, for this, we'll just pop a couple other pieces of tape in there. Make sure it sits perfectly flat. Here we can see this tape sticks out, which, can we edit it out later or something? Sure, we could, but it's probably faster to just fix it right now, right? It's gonna take 2 seconds, and at best, it'll take a couple minutes, maybe, to do later, if we end up cutting it out. I'm making a mess of this corner, actually. I'm gonna leave it like that as an example of what not to do. How about that? Okay, so here is our image, and then we would set it up like this, take the picture. Again, we want to make sure we're not on an angle. This is obviously a really bad angle for it. And the same thing can happen left and right. We want to make sure that the plane of the camera is parallel to the plane of the paper here, right? So if it was on an angle, we would put our phone on an angle, but it's perfectly vertical right now, so we want to do the same thing with our camera. All right, and we'd set it up and take our picture. All right, so here we can see that the top left corner and the bottom right corner here don't really look that great. They look like they've been kind of mangled a little bit, and although it was really not planned on my part, I won't pretend that that was part of my plan to mess it up on purpose as some sort of a lesson to you, but let's pretend for a minute. And so we really want to avoid kind of touching and moving things around too much whenever possible, all right? Because again, the point I mentioned earlier, any kind of tiny little thing really shows up in the photo, even though it might not be that noticeable at a first glance. The other thing is that we would go bring this into Photoshop or something and do like a levels adjustment or curves or something to kind of pop the whites a little bit and get rid of some of those shadows. But if we compare it to the initial photo we took when we were standing over top looking straight down, I hope the difference is pretty noticeable in terms of that shadow. That shadow would be really difficult, if not impossible, to get rid of in Photoshop. So this is the idea. We eliminate the shadows, take the picture, makes our life easier later. Now, the other thing, this is a little more kind of higher end idea here. If we want to make sure we've got really even lighting across our whole thing, we want to make sure that the shadows are, that the left side, let's say, is just as bright as the right side. It's being lit by the same light, okay? And a little test we can do is put a pencil like this here or something, and we can see that the shadow is being cast over here like this, and there's no shadow over here. Okay, that means that the light is coming from the left-hand side is brighter than the light that's coming from the right-hand side, number one, and that this side of the paper is gonna be brighter than this side of the paper. Okay, and in a photograph, it will be noticeable, especially if the image you're documenting is large. This is relatively small. It probably won't be super noticeable. But again, if you're trying to do something where, someone's paying you to do a job or something, then you want to make sure you do a good job, right? You want to get the best image we can get. And with that in mind, you probably don't want to actually touch the eraser to someone's artwork, right? But I'm going to do it for this anyway. So ideally, we would have a light set up over here, shining across this way. The same light coming from this side, shining across this way. And so the two lights, as they're overlapping each other, will help balance out any kind of maybe imperfections in the lights. And also, if one is brighter than the other slightly, which can happen, when they overlap each other, if they overlap each other perfectly, that kind of balances out. So you end up with the same light consistently across the whole thing. And check the shadow density is the same on the left and right. Okay, for our purposes right here, this is gonna be just fine. It's gonna look good. Except for this. That's my phone. So this is the image after I brought it in Photoshop, and I was able to crop the corners out because there was no image there, so it wasn't really critical. However, with some images, that would be a real problem to just lose the corners, right? But this looks pretty good. I was able to hide those shadows pretty easily with a quick levels adjustment, and all set.